talk about, I mean, most people have not even heard of what does TPP mean?
Right. Well, it's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and this is part of this global web of trade agreements that are being negotiated, that have been negotiated over the last 30 years, that, from the outsider, it could seem like it's a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo, but really what's at stake is democracy. The report that we just put out looked at a very troubling part of what these agreements involve, which are these special trade tribunals that are used by corporations to directly undermine the ability of citizen movements to influence their government. The famous case, of course, is the one from Bolivia, where Bechtel from San Francisco came in, took over the privatized water system, raised people's rates up by more than 50%, was kicked out by a popular rebellion, and turned around on a $1 million investment and sued Bolivia for $50 million. These cases, there's almost 500 a year now of these cases being filed all over the world. Philip Morris, the tobacco giant, is suing Uruguay for the sin of putting health warnings on their cigarettes. In El Salvador, so Uruguay decided to put stiffer health warnings on cigarette packages. And Philip Morris doesn't like that. So Philip Morris uses a bilateral investment treaty between Uruguay and Switzerland. So Philip Morris somehow puts on a Swiss hat and pretends it's a Swiss company and is suing Uruguay for hundreds of millions of dollars. This is everywhere. I mean, one of the most egregious of the current cases is in El Salvador, where, here's the community of Las Cabañas that discovers that this Canadian mining firm is going to dump poisonous chemicals into their drinking water to suck gold out of the ground, and they do what citizens are supposed to do. They hammer on their government until they get the government to agree not to let the mining go forward. So what does the company do? The company turns around under one of these trade agreements and sues for $315 million. So what you have, it's a win-win for the companies, because they either win huge amounts of money. I mean, this is 1% of GDP in El Salvador. The amounts of money are enormous. Or, just as important, they have a chilling effect on the ability and the willingness of governments to protect their people.
And you're saying there are as many as 500 lawsuits a year related to these kinds of trade
it's grown like this. And it's a new derivatives market. These companies that are bringing these cases will actually go to investors and say, we will sell you for a price, 30% of the cut if we win the case. I mean, it's a marketplace, but the bottom line is what it means is if you are looking for the protection of your environment, watch out to be sued. And this is not just poor countries. Germany is getting sued because after Fukushima, the citizen movements there were able to win a moratorium on nuclear power. And so the Swedish company involved in their nuclear power industry is suing them for 700 million euro. And the TPP is just going to bring more of this.
But the other side of this is that obviously these corporations are reacting to an upsurge of citizen movements, insisting on protecting their environments and protecting their resources. So your sense is that that there's been a huge spurt over the past decade or two in terms of the citizen movements forcing their governments to try to protect their resources?
Well, I think that's certainly true if you look across Latin America, where citizen movements and more progressive governments have been able to take these kinds of actions. And look, if you talk to a lawyer who makes $1,000 an hour representing these corporations, they'll say, look, we need legal security. Countries need foreign investment. We need legal security. We're just trying to protect against the possibility that someone comes in with soldiers and takes away our mine. But this is not just about them getting the $5 million they put in back. Under these bilateral investment treaties, and certainly it's going to be the same under the TPP, these corporations can sue for the profits that they expected to earn and didn't. That's why you get these sums that are just off the charts.
President Obama has nominated Michael Froman as Kirk's replacement for U.S. Trade Representative. Last year, he defended the Trans-Pacific Partnership during a speech at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
I don't think I have to tell this audience how important the Asia-Pacific market is to the United States, whether it's manufactured goods, agricultural products, or services. It represents 40% of global trade. In 2010, U.S. goods exports totaled $775 billion, comprising almost 60% of all of our goods exports. And goods exports to the region are up 25% over the last 2 years. For our farmers and ranchers, nearly 3/4 of our total exports go to Asia-Pacific customers. And for our service providers, nearly 40% of their total services exports go to the region. And these benefits are not just for the big multinational companies, but for America's small and medium-sized enterprises too, who export over $170 billion to the Asia-Pacific region.
That's Michael Froman, nominated as the replacement for Ron Kirk as U.S. Trade Representative. Celeste Drake, if you can talk about the significance of what he said in the TPP, where you're coming from the AFL-CIO.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We question the wisdom of pursuing the TPP in the first place. We do have, for better or for worse, the World Trade Organization, which has lowered tariffs around the world and has allowed us to increase our exports, as Mr. Froman was explaining in the speech. So what the TPP is about is all of these other things around the tariffs. So it is about these investor-state dispute tribunals. It's about harmonizing rules for food safety. It's about harmonizing rules for intellectual property. A lot of rules that if citizens aren't really participating in the formation of those rules, they're not necessarily going to work out and inure to the benefit of working people and America's citizens. So we're very active in following the negotiations, in advocating for better rules that will help workers, real farmers, small businesses, because our past trade agreements, starting with NAFTA and on down the line, have basically been big packages that benefit the 1%. And if anybody else benefits, it's really only by accident and not really by design.
Celeste Drake, you're scheduled to testify on Bangladesh and the situation with workers there. How would these trade agreements impact on this whole issue of the race to the bottom in manufacturing by many international corporations to places like Bangladesh, which result in these tragedies like the Tazreen fire and then the recent building collapse of more than 1,000 workers killed?
Well, in trade agreements, and beginning with NAFTA, which was a really poor example, the United States has tried to put in so-called labor obligations. In NAFTA, it was a side agreement, largely unenforceable. They've gotten better through the years, but they're really kind of a Band-Aid that tries to fix some of the really destructive patterns that have been caused by globalization. Globalization on a corporate model has led to this race to the bottom where the world's biggest corporations really play a game of arbitrage, and they're pitting, especially developing countries, one against the other, who can provide the lowest wages, the weakest worker rights regime, the fewest unions. And, the winner is really the loser because they've got workers who are working really hard, putting in a hard day's work, and very possibly putting their lives at risk, and definitely not raising their standards of living. And when workers in any one country are allowed to be abused like that and have their rights repressed, it actually lowers the wages and the rights for workers all around the world. So when we can try to improve it slightly through these trade agreements, that's never going to be the silver bullet to really, really fix the problem. We've got to address it globally because it's a global problem.